We will begin with a recap in a moment of day 3. And then we will go along to the session on using information management systems to support BPA implementation. After the series of 4 presentations, we'll go to a Q&A where we will pose questions coming from you via the chat to the speakers, and there'll be some final remarks and wrap up of the overall event. So now I have the pleasure of passing you over to Lawrence Lachman Singh, Select Facilitator and Moderator from day 3, who will provide us with a brief recap on the session on community forest management, improving revenues through good practices.
Thanks very much, Amy, and morning, everybody. Welcome back to the fourth and final day of the webinar. It's my pleasure to present a quick summary of what came up yesterday when we were discussing communities. And, I just wanted to give a quick overview of where we started. We're looking at communities from the perspective of how do we embrace and adopt good and better practices that will help communities to generate more sustainable sources of revenue from the forests. This is an economic question, and communities, of course, being at the heart of the forest economic question because of the poverty and so on. So we started in Georgetown. This is where, for many of you who are joining today, Guyana is a coast community in South America. Most of us on the call are from Georgetown, at least the organizing team, but we went to Kokwani and we spoke to Brian Boyle yesterday. He's a forester. He's in a forested area. He gave us some inputs about community forest organizations. We then went across to Paul Pierre in Quibana, which is close to Venezuela in the northwest of Guyana. And he's indigenous, and he gave us his perspectives of the indigenous communities when it comes to revenues and good practices that communities can adopt. When they were done, we heard from 2 friends from overseas who gave us international perspectives on the question of communities and how do we help communities to develop more sustainable ways of working. So specifically, what we came up with we tried to look at 5 key areas for good practices. And I'm just going to move now into a quick presentation that you can, just one second. Sorry, this is not it. I will share the link for this presentation in the chat shortly, but I wanted to just run it through for you. It's a quick summary of the substance of what we discussed yesterday. So when it came to communities and good practices, I wanted to highlight 3 topics that I'll just recap for you. And as I mentioned, I will share this link with you in the chat. We wanted to talk a bit about improved business management, access to finance and markets, and then just improving capacities. So when it came to improving business management, there were 4 dimensions that came up yesterday. Again, this is a summary, so please excuse me, colleagues, if I don't get 100% of it. Strengths were numerous. Both our international and national colleagues spoke about a number of the things that really make sense to focus on in terms of strengths. There was community participation. This is a really key element of helping communities to grow and evolve, how to include them in the process of policy making, decision taking, and so on. Information sharing is a key part of participation that came up very strongly yesterday. Some of the community forest organizations, and Brian Boyle spoke about this at length yesterday, that there's a responsibility of community groups to also give something back, not just to the members of the groups, but also to the communities at large. In Guyana, we do have the strength of real durable forest management systems in place. For example, the wood tracking systems, codes of practice, and so on. And this is what we're trying to evolve in the FLECT process as well. Third-party certification is there, PFC, FSC, and so on. And then we heard a lot about what are some of the accountability measures that communities need to embrace. And we have some of that here in Guyana. Brian and Paul spoke about, reporting to the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, reporting to GFC, reporting to Village Council and members of community forest organizations as well. Of course, there are challenges, and this is one of the reasons why we're having this webinar. One of the things that seemed possible, we heard in Guatemala that the concession sizes there are probably about 50% larger than the concession sizes here in Guyana. Maybe there are challenges with regards to the specifics of the forestry requirements. A big discussion about the CFO business model and how do we actually move to models that actually incentivize more cooperation and more accountability, more transparency. The point was made yesterday that once money is on the table, the challenges grow larger. In Guyana, we have this phenomena where community forest organizations are collectively accountable for breaches of an individual member. So that's considered to be a real challenge that we have to deal with. Converting to digital systems, when we try to move from some of the more manual paper-based type systems, how do we get technology more into the process? That's an ongoing focus, but it is a challenge. The low productivity, there was a discussion that some of the commercial species have already been extracted from nearby forests, and so CFOs are perhaps not producing as much because of proximity and distances. And of course, all of that contributes to a high cost of production, a low profit margin, and we know those are real challenges, not only for communities, but also for regular larger FSOs. There are opportunities, we discussed some of them, these are just a few. How to use deforested areas for alternative livelihoods, example, livestock. Our colleagues from overseas talked about forest restoration, agriculture, and those other kinds of things. There were many opportunities, but I just give a snapshot here. Lessons learned, there were quite a few. Again, I'll share, you'll get the link. Separating business from politics was something that was talked about from overseas. Also creating necessary bylaws for financial governance and business management so that people are confident about transparency and financial arrangements. There needs to be a leadership role from government to help alternative livelihoods to evolve, but it can't happen alone. NGOs, I forgot to mention this, NGOs have a role to play in this as well, civil society at large, perhaps even longer validity period for concessions to incentivize a better care for concessions. If it's for a longer period, people may have an incentive to treat the forest in a more sustainable way. And then maximize the inclusion and benefits to young people and women. So that was business management. And I want to now move quickly over to access to finance and markets, just to focus on opportunities and challenges, because this is a big thing spoken about by the Guyanese presenters yesterday. There are huge challenges, lack of finance. They need to recapitalize some of their operations. What do you do about the high cost of machinery? Very difficult for small communities to access international markets, but maybe we could continue that discussion because I remember things like stockyards were spoken about in an earlier panel. There's a low level of investment by the public and private sector. So how do we get that up? Clearly, there's a larger conversation that needs to happen. And then the CFOs themselves lack shares and assets and other forms of collateral in order to raise resources. And the business model actually seems to discourage investors because there are just too many cooks and not enough security of relationship in terms of a business sense. A couple of opportunities, maybe that were spoken of yesterday, the potential for joint ventures, third-party agreements, and of course, development funding that could come from international partners. Finally, and this is perhaps a bit of a recap of some of the earlier points, but improving capacity as a general matter is considered to be really key. There are opportunities to do that through forestry regulations, through FLECT and so on. There may be others, I've mentioned some of them before. Again, challenges when it comes to capacity building. How do we get these more complex managerial and technical training, especially for downstream processing, if we're going to go to value added? How do you get communities to actually integrate that kind of capacity? And very key, how do we help communities to build a capacity to comply with the legal frameworks, such as, for example, national insurance, paying taxes, and so on? Lessons learned in terms of capacity building. We need people to understand what they're supposed to do, what are their rights and what are their responsibilities. We really have to figure out how to transfer knowledge more effectively. And then we must invest in technical capacities that help people to run their businesses more productively. And finally, and this was a point made by Brian Boyle yesterday, We have to invest in the education of the people who live in the communities. And they talked about scholarships, but somehow doing more to empower communities as a whole. So I want to end on that point. As I mentioned, I'll put this presentation into the chat, the link. Thank you very much, Amy. Back to you.
Thanks, Lawrence. That was a great summary. I'm going to quickly now introduce you all to our moderator for today, and Mohindra Chand. Mr. Mohindra Chand is the country manager of Malaysian-owned Barama Company Limited in Guyana. He has a total of 20 years of experience in forestry of Guyana in both the government and private sectors. He was former Deputy Commissioner of Forests at the Guyana Forestry Commission, and he has served in several national and international bodies and represented Guyana at several international forums. Mohindra.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are from around the world. Thank you very much, Amy. It's indeed a pleasure this morning to engage with such a wide variety of stakeholders. I think this is the essence of the FLECT and VPA process. It's a stakeholdership ownership. So this morning, we're going to engage with you on a topic which, in my own opinion, it is what actually puts the tire to the road. You know, we've talked a lot over the last 3 days about markets and community level and so on, which addresses a lot of the beneficiaries' interests. Today's topic is going to actually put into perspective now, not the mechanics, but more of the intelligence behind the management and the due diligence of the process. It is probably the most disliked aspect of the VPA because it's where the details are in the in the devil's pudding, if I can put it that way. It calls for a lot of smart thinking, a lot of participation. So I would like to get into the session. The theme today is designing and implementing timber information management systems. What lessons are there for Guyana? So the objective here is that we're talking about the supply chain control components of the Timber Legality Assurance System. It's a fundamental part of the VPA. The process of designing or adapting an information management system for the supply chain control component of the TLAS needs to build on their national legal framework and the existing oversight and control system, and also meet the requirements laid out in the VPA. During this process, key decisions include the scope of the system, whether an existing system is adopted or a new system created, and how to engage with and include stakeholders in the design and testing process. Other decisions include the funding for a system and plans for financial sustainability and maintenance, how to communicate about the system and how to train future users, and whether to roll the system out in stages or once complete. Developing an information management system is a complex process that can take many years. Guyana has been able to build on its existing legality assurance system and is currently considering options for how to adapt this system to meet the requirements of the VPA. That is a mouthful, and believe me, that is only scratching the surface. I have a wonderful panel of presenters, and I think that their perspective from the various regions of the world will show you that there's a lot of commonality and there's a lot of differences. And I am pleased to also share with you that the group is fairly diverse, the group of presenters, and that is another expression of the complexities of the topic we're dealing with today. So I would like to crave your indulgence in allowing our presenters to firstly do their presentations, and then we will take your questions all at once. You're free to send your questions in via chat, the chat aspect of Zoom, and we will do our utmost best to select the questions and try to address as much as we can. I beg for forgiveness ahead of this that we may not be able to address all of your questions, but rest assured that it's being recorded and they can be more direct engagements with the presenters after the seminar is over. So I would like to get right into it and firstly introduce my first presenter in this group. He is no stranger to the group and he has been introduced prior, but I'll give him the benefit of a second introduction. I think he would love that. So my first presenter here is Kenny David. Mr. David, the holder of a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science from the University of Guyana and a Master's degree in Natural Resource Management from the University of the West Indies, has been employed by the Guyana Forestry Commission since 2006. During this period, Mr. David has worked in areas such as forest monitoring, licensing, industry development, export and import of forest produce. Mr. David has been heading the Forest Products Development and Marketing Council and the FLEC Secretariat since its inception in 2012. Mr. David brings over a decade of experience of working in the forest sector with various stakeholders at both the local and international level, and firmly believes that forests are so much more than just trees. So with that being said, I would like to now invite Mr. Kenny David to begin his presentation. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thanks, Neil, for this opportunity. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, it's clear.
Thanks. I think it is a pleasure to be here again to share with you. I think it's been a very interesting 4 days. I think there's so much that we have heard, so much that we have learned, and even as we continue today's discussion on more of the technological side of this, the management systems that are required. Let me just share my screen here. I'll jump quickly into this presentation. I do believe, as Neil has highlighted already, that when we talk about information management systems, we need to understand every country is different, every country is unique. But I do believe that in that uniqueness, however, there is a place and a critical place for management systems, information systems, technology, as it were, to fit. And it is from discussions like these that I believe we can find that right place. And so it is not necessarily to try to do what another country has done, but rather to learn and understand better, so that when we do design a system for Guyana and our legality assurance system, it is one that works and works well and really meets the needs of our stakeholders, while at the same time achieving the objectives of the VPA. And so today I just want to talk a little bit about what is happening in country at the level of the GFC, what we've been doing in terms of the system, and also to sort of provide a broader overview of what these systems can generally do and why they are beneficial. The hope is that, as we heard, and as Neil mentioned, the other presenters quite diverse, but I think it'll bring a wealth of information to us that we can hopefully, after this, continue to cipher through and get to the point where we want to, where we land on something that works best for Guyana. So, firstly, well, as you know, we have, in a nutshell, as we say, the VPA is really about assuring the legality of timber and timber products that are going to the EU market. In our case, of course, it is to any market. It is to all markets, even the local market. And I think, and so that is in a nutshell what the VPA is about. And timber legality, the timber legality assurance system, as we've heard about, is really, and I think the name sort of captures it nicely, in that it is that system that ensures or assures the legality of timber that is coming. Within those systems, there are a number of components, a number of things that are built into the broader system, so that at the end of it, you can say, yes, the timber is legal. Maybe a simple example would be like having a driver's license, for example. You can, how do you know someone is legally able to drive a motor vehicle, for example? He or she must have a license. But it's not just having a license, it's also having a license that is valid, because as you know, a license will expire after a certain period of time. And when it is expired, that person, though they can drive, they are at that point considered illegal, if I can put it that way. And so it's understanding that what these systems are seeking to do, this timber legality assurance system, as we heard of, or the Guyana timber legality assurance system, is what it's really seeking to do is to ensure that whatever timber is coming has been legal, and we can verify that legality. On the screen, you'd see the components of that system. We talk about first allocation of harvesting rights. How are persons being able to get the concessions that they're using? What are they? What are the checks that are in place to ensure that when one gets a concession, there is a system that has been followed, that he or she or a company or whomever has legally obtained that concession. And I think all of us would agree that that is critical if you're going to, starting it at the right place. The legality definition, number of, again, checks and balances, the wood tracking system. What is the documentation that is being used as you are from source, as it were, from the forest all the way to the market? What are the documentation that has to be in place? What are the checks that are being done, the permits used, and the tags that are used to ensure that, again, you are legally moving that produce from point A to point B. And then point number 4, which is quite important, and we need to understand this as well, is that these systems will have to verify legality. The early example I gave with someone having a license to drive a car, someone has to check that her license is still valid. Now, if you think about it, though, for those of us who understand the sort of Guyana scenario, if you think about it, the one who's issuing us those licenses, the license that you currently drive with, they actually would know, or should know, or have access to the information of when your license actually expires. So, some of us, we often have a situation where days after we're driving, then the police stops us, and then we say, oh, you know what, your license is expired. And then you realize that, but ideally somebody actually has the information that could have told you before that your license will be expired. And so these systems also have a component where you're verifying that the person is legal, and whatever documentation that they should have, that they do have. FLEC licensing is part of the system as well. The actual license that will be issued for timber that is destined for the EU, or export certificates in the Guyana scenario for timber that is destined for other destinations as well. Because as I said, quite importantly to note that while we're talking about the system with the EU market in that sense in mind, it is also going to cover all the other activities that are happening in countries. So irrespective of which market you're going to, you're still adhering to the same system. There is the independent audit aspect. So the systems will have to be checked or audited to ensure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. A complaint mechanism, which I think is a very important aspect of these legality assurance systems. And so you and I would know that, like every system, from time to time there will be complaints, but those complaints should be heard, should be addressed. As long as they are valid, they should be addressed. Because again, it may mean that something is not working with the system as it should. Therefore, we can. There's a space to capture those complaints, record them. There has to be a record who made the complaint. Is it a valid complaint? And then address that complaint. And of course, monitoring of the implementation itself of the TLAS is again quite useful. Of course, in Guyana's case, the Forestry Commission is leading in terms of designing and developing the system. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are at least another 16 other agencies that will be part of this process. And as much as, and I agree with Neil, it's quite complicated when you think of it in even our local setting, where you have all those agencies, and they're all having their specific mandates and all doing their own thing in that sense. But again, for the purpose of the VPA, we have to bring all that information together into a common place and be able to use that information to make informed decisions. And that is why when we talk about these management systems, these information management, is really to understand first the magnitude of information that has to be brought to a common place, but brought in a manner and in a timely, in a time effective manner as well, to ensure that when you make decisions, you're making effective and accurate decisions in that sense. All right. So that in a nutshell is really what these systems are seeking to do. In Guyana, and what we're thinking of doing. So you would know we have there is the wood tracking system, which has as we like a paper, or it's mostly paper based, or it's a paper trail. But that system has two aspects. There is the operational aspects, and then there's the inspection. So information is being collected in the local scenario, local example. Information is being collected by the operators, if we call it that way, or the enterprises, as I have it on the screen. So there are those that are collecting, you guys out there, the stakeholders, the sawmills, the lumberyard owners, and the concessionaires. You're collecting information. And you're submitting, so you're keeping your own information, of course, but you're also having to submit information to the GFC on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. But while that is happening, simultaneously, what is also happening is the GFC is also collecting information. And so all that information is being collected from both you, and we are collecting as well. So we are doing our inspections, as you would know. We're inspecting the forest, we're inspecting the sawmills, the lumber yards. We're inspecting the transportation. We're looking at trucks and boats and barges as they're coming. But all of that, just understand, it's all bringing this information into a system. We currently capture that information, and it's stored in databases, albeit at this point, I do believe there is, a lot of these databases, I think there's still need for a greater coherence in that sense. But those are the things that we are currently working on. And that's why learning from some of the other example, I think would be most useful in terms of how do we do that effectively? Because currently we are collecting so much information. And I think you have to have the right system to manage and deal with all that information in a way that is useful for us at the level of the Forestry Commission, because it makes no sense to collect data that is not useful, or you can't do anything useful with it. Currently, there's a project happening at the GFC where we're mapping the existing databases. Just because again, before you sort of decide where you want to go, you have to understand what you have. And so we are currently mapping to understand what exists, and so we can then start talking about. Of course, that will then inform the IT architecture and the functionalities we're looking for. What are we currently able to do? And that is what this project is really seeking to do. What are we currently able to do? What data are we collecting? Is there data that we are not collecting that the VPA requires that has to be captured? And then what is the best system to capture that information? I think we need to understand also that the stakeholders have a very, very important role to play in all of this. And I'm sure you'll hear some of this from our other colleagues. How does a stakeholder fit into these systems in a way that is effective? Whatever information is collected at your level, and as you saw earlier in the slide, there is a lot of information you're collecting, but collecting it, submitting it, is it the most effective way? Can it be done better? Even information the GFC is collecting and all the other 16 agencies. Each agency, as you would know, so let's take the EPA, for example. EPA is collecting information to allow for it to ensure your environmental standards are being maintained. How are they able to do that effectively? They also have to monitor, but they're capturing data that has to be shared with us to ensure you're compliant. So again, these systems can be quite extensive. We are still in the process of designing, what is the best system for Guyana. And that is why I agree with Neil that this is quite a useful topic to discuss, so that we land on a system that really works best for Guyana. I think maybe just 1 or 2 points to point out from this particular slide is when we talk about, so there's verification of legal compliance. And I think this is where these systems are good. You have a series of information that is coming in. You have real-time information. And that is the aim, to have information as close to real time as possible. But it also allows you to verify information. And I think this is where it really is critical, as Neil pointed out, where rubber hits the road. It is where you can, because it's not just collecting, but it's information that has to be verified. The TLAS systems is based on information that must be verified. Because again, going back to the license, if I can't verify, if you tell me, because I know there are many people who can drive, certainly, but are they licensed to do so? Maybe not, or it's questionable. But if there shouldn't be a question if I'm to say that your produce is legal. So let me just use legality of timber. So there should not be a question as to whether the timber you're bringing to the market, any market, including the local market, there should never be a question as to whether or not it is legal. And to answer that question, these systems, I think, allow us to have data that is easily accessible, where we can verify it quickly. So let's say I get a permit, how the system is designed, an environmental permit, for example, just to give you an example. If I capture I have an environmental permit in front of me, I should be able to check with the agency who's issuing that. Let's say that's the EPA in Guyana. And the EPA should be able to quickly say to me, or even the data that they have submitted should come from a verified source. The way these systems work, EPA is sending information to us verified upon the point of receiving it. Yes, it is true and correct. And of course, the last point talks about decision making and how do we, and of course, it's evidence-based. We have the information. That's why these systems, again, are quite useful. In Guyana, as you know, geography, distances, location of forestations, it's all quite challenging. Internet connectivity, there are a number of things that often makes getting information to make decisions challenging. These systems, again, allows you to make decisions in a more effective manner. And of course, you're making it based on having data in front of you. Maybe just a snapshot of what these systems are able to do. For example, if you can understand a small table there. So let's say it's an annual operational plan. So he or she is compliant. The company is compliant, and that's quite easy to tick. So your system, you say, does the person have an operational plan? Yes, just quickly ticks it. That's it. Fiscal obligations or monetary obligations. Let's say evidence is accepted. Yes, he's compliant. But in the third, in 3.1, what you see is there may be cases where someone may have something that is outstanding. And what the system will allow you to, what these systems can allow you to do also, and I say can because we're still depending on what we want our system to do, but what they can do is they can allow you to recommend to stakeholders, listen, there is still something that is outstanding. And we can give you a period of time to fix it. You can submit additional information. If you look at how it is, it's submitted, it's assessed, and you may still be approved at the end because you have supplied additional information or something that was outstanding that now says you're approved. Or let's say in case of social obligations, something may not be yet approved. And of course, it may put on hold us being able to issue a FLEC license or giving you the green light to be able to ship or export that timber. So these systems, I think, are very, very useful. And even in the Guyana scenario, can prove to be useful. This slide, I'll again, this is just sort of captures in word form what I just explained from the previous slide. So I'll just keep it over in the interest of time. Maybe to just pause on this one a little bit. Sorry for the use of green, but when we, as foresters, we see green all the time, so we get stuck with these green templates. So forgive me, please. But essentially, what it's showing is, you have your forest all the way to trade or to the market. In the gray, you're seeing the information that you are capturing. The information as you say is generated by the stakeholder. So inventory information, harvesting information. You see entry, what is going into your sawmill, what is coming out, what is being produced at the mill, what is actually leaving your sawmill and going to the market as well. And that information, as what I was explaining earlier, what the system will allow us to do in the dark green arrows talk about validating, and the sort of lighter green, I hope the green is not too close. The lighter green talks about reconciling. Now, just to also understand the way information is collected and used with these systems is, first we have to verify. So if you submit, let's say, inventory information, for those of us who are familiar with that, if you're submitting inventory information in terms of trees, for example, somebody is checking that information is in fact true and correct. What you submitted is in fact correct. The green heart is 5 meters long or 10 meters long, and it has these dimensions, and it has average this volume. So we're checking, and it's the number. This is the number on that tree, and so we are verifying that. So we're validating that what you said is true and correct. What is interesting, and we're just to touch a little on the other point, what the systems also allow you to do is when you talk about reconciliation. Now we do these things. A lot of it is already being done, but being done on paper, it takes a lot of time and effort. So we talk about reconciling. So let's say between the inventory and what you harvested, as you would know, you don't always harvest what you did the inventory for. But when we compare those steps, when we look at the harvesting information, we should have, now if we see you're harvesting more than you had done in your inventory, clearly there's going to be a problem. But again, your system should easily and quickly, so you have a system that will easily, point that out. Listen, Tom Jones is harvesting, has already harvested X. But the other thing I think that makes these systems quite useful is that you want that information. You don't want to come weeks after Tom Jones has already gone past his limit to say, Tom, you need to stop. Tom should have stopped a week ago. I'm just giving an example. But these systems can provide ready alerts, quick alerts. So listen, Tom is approaching. You can design a system to say, tell me when Tom is 10% away from his quota, and Tom is now actually, but it highlights you that Tom only has 10% remaining. So you're already paying attention to what Tom is doing. And that's why I'm saying in Guyana's context, we're doing a lot of this already. A lot of it is being done in a paper format, a lot of separate databases, but still, you know, and again, we'll hear from other colleagues on what this, you know, how to do it and do it better. This slide, again, just touches on that little diagram we went through just now. Maybe I want to highlight, I know I'm running a little bit close on time here. So maybe just to highlight maybe a few more points in the next 2 or 3 slides. Of course, we'll share the presentation. You'll have it as well. You know, when we talk about, so you have your exporters. If you look at the slide diagram to the side, you have exporters, you have your licensing authority, let's say in this case, the GFC, and then you have those authorities that are what we call the competent authorities in the EU that are checking licenses that are issued. And I really want you to understand, if the hour is really trying to help you to understand there's a working relationship and there's a flow of information back and forth constantly, consistently. But these systems allow you to do that. So an exporter applying for a license and being issued one, the GFC issuing that license and keeping a number of information. When was it applied for? We have records in it. But also if the EU competent authority wants to check. So the system allows for us having conversations a lot faster, a lot easier, because we can link all of this into one system. All right. I think maybe for the next 2 slides, I just highlight some points that I think we should consider that are very useful for these systems. Business planning, as I mentioned, decision making, quite useful. The last point on this slide I wanted to highlight, transparency. Again, very, very important. Everybody, I believe, is entitled to work within a system that is transparent. We want it at every level, whether it's in your home or your business. Transparency, it really needs to happen, and you know, it allows for greater accountability. And I think these systems ensure that you can show every step of the way what was collected, how it was verified, and why you issued a particular license or why you didn't, so that there's no question as to was this person transparent or not. What the system allows for greater transparency. How can stakeholders are seeing and getting access to a lot more useful information in a timely manner. And maybe I'll just again, maybe just 2 points here. A lot of I think there's a lot of driving force, and why I think we should embrace a bit more of designing these systems in light of what is happening at the global level. And that's what I was really trying to capture on this slide. You know, things like the VPA itself, CITES, certification. I know some persons, we talked about certification a day or 2 earlier. Certification schemes, they're requiring information. I know a lot of stakeholders are asking, you know, what FSC, PFC, you know, should we go that road? But understand a lot of those systems require information, in so much more information in a timely manner, the Lacey Act and so forth. Yeah, I think I'll stop there as I mentioned some of the other points. But again, I'll share the presentation with you. But I really thanks for your time, and again, I know I've been a bit long, but really I hope I've really helped you to understand what these systems can do, and why, as a country, we need to consider carefully, you know, embracing some of these things that the system, I think, can bring and make what we currently do a lot more effective and efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenny. I know it was a lot to cram into 15 minutes, but you only went over by 6 minutes, so you did a great job. Not to worry. I'm also alerting the other presenter that Kenny has told us 6 minutes of time. All right, so I have the great pleasure of introducing our next speaker. And I have a little special attachment to where he comes from. Our speaker is now Chris Beeko. Chris Beeko was a coordinator of the Ghana process during the voluntary partnership agreement negotiation phase, and was a key member of the negotiation team. He is now director of the department that is leading Ghana in the implementation of the Legality Assurance System, the GHLAS, and the VPA as a whole. The department he heads, the Timber Validation Department, TVD, is also the designated verification entity under Ghana's Timber Legality Assurance System arrangement. He has worked with the Forestry Commission from 1986. Chris, you've been around a while, to date, and has a mixed background in forestry, IT, and forest governance. Quite an interesting mix. Mr. Beeko has been involved in the development and facilitation of a number of multi-stakeholder dialogue processes. And Chris is from the part of the world where Guyana is often mistaken as being Ghana. You know, we're such a small nation, so we're not so well known. Well, today we are well known because of oil. But before that, anytime you said you're from Guyana, they say, oh, you're from Africa. So Chris, you are our brother nation. So welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. So the mistake that people make is not only with you. I've had the same experience of people thinking that I was talking about Guyana when I was talking about Ghana. It's a pleasure, I must say, to be with, having invited to this. And I'm going to talk as a follow-up to what Kenny did. And I'm talking about the Ghana wood tracking system, which is operational as we speak. So I'm talking about what prompted the implementation, development, and implementation of the tracking system. And so the rationale, the approach, the scope. And then I'll go on to talk more about the elements in there, what you experienced during the system design, and then we'll see some lessons learned at the end of the day. So start straight away with the rationale and approach to development of the system. So the purpose of the development was certainly to establish the chain of custody requirements, Ghana having entered into the VPA with the European Union. As we know, this is a component or an element in the Legality Assurance System. And so we embarked on it to make sure that we are compliant and we're able to deliver to the requirements of the agreement. But the agreement was not the sole driver for our implementing this tracking system. We did that because we wanted to improve on our log tracking system. And so predating the VPA was a log tracking project that Ghana had been pursuing. And so we saw this as an opportunity to really bring to fruition what we have been trying to do over a period of time. So that was the second reason. So there was a national reason for doing that. The other reason, of course, was to, again, help us to improve on our timely reconciliation of data along the process chain from harvesting, actually from allocation to point of sale, and to not only to reconcile, but certainly with the objective of removing inconsistencies. So this was the rationale. And the approach to developing was, it was a novel one. We had to start from the scratch. And scratch because there was none around at the time we started. So we started thinking about this some 10 years ago, and there was nothing really we could compare with. No other country system was there to look at. So it's a completely new system. And we designed the system based on the existing business process. So as I said earlier, there was a log tracking project that predated Ghana's development of the LAS, and through that project and from existing documentation and forest management prescriptions we had in place, we had a fairly robust business process. And so when it was time to develop the system, we did not have to kind of invent or redesign a new business process. And that was a kind of comfort to us. It was an automation, therefore, of the existing business process. And as the system development went along, there were some minor tweaks that we made. But primarily, we automated an existing business process. We didn't have to invent or look at a new business process. And for the system that we have, Forestry Commission continues to retain ownership of the system. So the system captures transaction data from the point of allocation of the resource to the point of sale. So everything that happened along that process chain So from allocation to determination of yields to harvesting, transportation, tax payment, milling, everything, pretty much looking at remembering the diagram that Kenny showed, the system captures that. So it's a comprehensive system. And so it enables reconciliation of timber flow data across the process chain. And I already mentioned that it helps us to detect inconsistencies, remembering the objective of the implementation of the system. It helps us to, at the end of the day, work or determine the legality of a consignment, which I'll show a little later. So yes, at the end of the process chain in the system is able to help us make recommendations for consignments, whether they are legal or not. And so the system also captures field or takes in results of the legality audits from the field. So side by side transaction data on wood flows that we input in the system. There is also, as you know, the ascertaining of compliance to the legal standard, which is conducted on the ground in the field. So at the end of every audit cycle, the results of that audit cycle or audit findings are inputted in the system. So you have timber flow information and you have audit information. The system takes care of both or incorporates both, which helps us to come at the end of the day, a conclusion on whether a consignment has inconsistencies on one hand, and whether it has complied with legal provisions on the other. Still on the scope of the system, so I've talked about the system incorporating these two aspects, fiscal flows and legality field audit reports. We have interfaces to portals, or we've built portals to the system. And so in the middle here, you see it's a client-server system. We access it through one mobile devices, handheld devices that are used to collect data in the field, as well as thin clients on workstations that are used to input data into the server system. And yeah, so that is the composition of the tracking system. And we have just coming on board an industry portal that has been built. And so the purpose of the industry portal is to make the system a lot more, or bring transparency of our transactions to industry, as well as enable industry to make direct data input in the system. And so areas or points where we were collecting data that industry actually should have inputted themselves. Now we have a portal that enables or will enable industry to make that data input themselves. So it saves us time, and it's a lot more authentic, and it makes industry, give them flexibility to interact and interface with the system. Of course, at the end of the day, all that goes to facilitating the uptake of the alias. We also have a transparency portal that has been built, and that transparency portal is actually something that was initiated by civil society. And so the LI that Ghana kind of promulgated after the VPA was signed and joins the Forestry Commission or the public sector to make information available on forest management to the public. And so in collaboration with the Forestry Commission, this portal has been built. And so you have access publicly, or the public has access into the system, and they are able to look at, for instance, or they will be able to, now we have dummy licenses that we issue, dummy flag license. When we really go online, they will see what how many flag licenses, which flag licenses have been issued to which destinations. And they will see also who has timber access rights in the system and a lot more information. So that's a transparency portal. And the system also interfaces with our financial system, which processes the payment of taxes, fiscal, financial flows around timber, for that matter, and helps us to, besides the timber flows, ascertain also whether the financial flows are in order. So we have these three main interfaces or links to the system. And hopefully coming online in the next few months would be a third one, which is the, okay, there we are. An interface with the EU competent authority. They're also going to have an interface to the system where they're going to be able to check licenses that are issued electronically online, so that it will reduce errors that will be associated with bookkeeping and what have you. So there's actually a fifth interface, but for now, this is what we can say, talking about scope interface of the system, or the GWTS, our wood tracking system with other systems. So on the systems design, what was the participation of multi-stakeholders in all this? So as I said earlier, the system was built on an existing business process, the technical system of the wood tracking system. It was built on an existing business process. So as far as that wood tracking system itself was concerned, it was pretty much an effort within the regulatory agency, Forestry Commission, because we were automating a process that we already had. But as you saw from the links that come into it, or the interfaces that we have, then civil society really played a role. We collaborated with civil society to have these portals in place. And well, so we're going to collaborate with we are actually collaborating with the EU competent authority to have the other portal also built. And we had, at the beginning of the process, what we call the multi-stakeholder steering committee that gave oversight. And that body was slightly metamorphosed into a multi-stakeholder implementation committee. And they were all at both phases headed by the state. But also important to mention is that the entire process was coordinated and was by what we call the VP Secretariat. And it's important because when I come to the lessons learned in a moment, I'll mention why it is important. This design of the system, so as I said, the approach was to automate the entire business process, data collection, mapping, billing, and associated reconciliation of data sets is all conducted on the system. So billing information is sent straight, for instance, from the wood flow system into the financial system. And again, this reduces errors, also facilitates reconciliation. Just to reiterate, the software development was done from the scratch. We didn't borrow from any software, off-the-shelf software. It was something that was developed from the scratch because we were automating a peculiar business process in Ghana. Okay. So I mentioned also the system is built as a client-server system. And so we have servers, we have workstations, we have mobile devices for field data capture, and hardware procurement were along this line. So we've certainly bought servers. We strengthened our workstation resources around the country. And the new thing that we introduced were mobile handheld devices to collect data. And right now, if you have a simple mobile device, like an Android phone, you are good to go. You can use that to collect data in the field. And going forward, we believe it will be more simplified. And I just mentioned around the country. So connectivity issues around the country was resolved by another parallel project, which was the implementation of a solar project to make sure that power downtimes, which 10 years ago was a big problem in Ghana, today is not, was minimized. So some of the infrastructural things we did was upgrading the existing server room to a data center, both at the head office and our selected site that we named the disaster recovery site. Also strengthening our local area network resources. We had to do some recabling of the head office. We had to introduce some more capable routers and so on and so forth. Yeah. And also in Ghana, we have quite a wide coverage of mobile telephony, and these telephone companies provide internet. But some places, the signals are weak. And so we had to introduce internet boosters to ensure that the districts were able to have strong connectivity. So I talked about the improvement of server rooms to data centers, the power supply, and the networking, and the solar power installation around the country at the 38 sites in the country. That was quite an elaborate input. So seeing that my time is up almost, I would talk about the stages or the phases through which we tested and deployed the system. So we had an initial pilot phase of the tracking system, and that was by a completely different company. Today we are working with a different company. But the first phase was more or less, I mean, we purposely inserted in the agreement that we would have a pilot phase because there was no system to learn from at the time. And that was useful in helping us to get insight that informed how we crafted the contract for the current phase that we are running. So talking about pilots, we have two phases. A pilot wood tracking system, that we moved away from to a present system, which itself was piloted in 5 districts before we spread to the rest of the country. So these ones are pretty straightforward. I will skip them how we did our user acceptance test. I'll skip them and come to the training approach, which was a combination of classroom and the field. So we put in batches about 600 to 900 field staff around the country together and show them how the system had been automated. And then after that, we took them to the field to show them how they would use the new, especially handheld devices, to capture the data. And the system mimicking the existing manual process was useful because then you didn't need to retrain anybody on the business process, just on how to use the device to capture the data. Okay, so the time it took was from the design of the actual one we are using now was from 3 years, was 3 years actually. It took us from design to deployment was 3 years. And after a 1-year break after the initial deployment, we went into another phase of system modification. And what we are using now is a modified version of the initial one that was done. Okay, so my concluding ones, we have quite some steep maintenance agreement with our service providers because the software itself costs us just over £5 million. Okay, and with the modification up to £6 million to develop and install. And the £10 million you see there is the additional, if you add what it costs to do the solar around the country. And so the maintenance based on the initial $6 million brings us to a cost of about $128,000 per annum. So going forward, in Ghana, you might want to consider the operating cost, the maintenance cost when you are building a system to see whether it will be sustainable over time. It's one thing that we are dealing with at the moment. The GWTS is mostly, as I mentioned, a technical GSA affair, and the stakeholders that are external to the FC help us, in addition to the portal that I've mentioned already, help us to develop and strengthen social responsibility agreement and compensation implementation. And the private sector was instrumental in helping us to shape how we grant access, or we granted access to them to make inputs, to make life easy for them, and to get their buy-in into the system. So the operation access remains mostly for the FC, but as I said, the portals enable all these other add-ons. Industry now will be able to submit transactional information to the portal. Sorry, my time is up now. So the benefits of the system. So transactions are faster in the electronic environment for sure. So the capacity to detect and correct inconsistencies are much better. We're able to see it. And we have more robust reporting for the FC from every corner where operation takes place. There's better application of management prescriptions because everything that happens in the field is visible. There's more transparency. And so not much can be done on the blind side of the authorities. And that helps those who are applying the management prescriptions to apply it better. And there is, as shown, more forest management information publicly available, pushing the frontiers of transparency. And so, certainly, there's better capability at determining legality of consignments with all that we've done. Actually, of course, it's been assessed by independent monitors as determined by the agreement. So the lessons learned, we surely have something to say about resistance to change. There was a good amount of resistance to change. And we learned how to identify and deal with those who are going to lose out because of the change that we're making, transiting from a manual environment to a digital environment. There were issues of computer literacy to deal with, power and connectivity issues to deal with, especially in the remote areas. And last but not the least, sustenance of the political interests during the critical moments of the system. My key lessons for Guyana are down there. Since I'm out of time, I will just stop here, but the presentation is available and maybe I can revisit this during the question time. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you so much. That was very informative. And it's a long process, but you've done it. And I know it's not the end. I think you've given Kenny an idea of how much he needs to ask for financially. So Kenny probably start to calculate numbers there. Quite a massive investment, I see. So let me get right into it because we're going a bit behind time. I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Alain Ossebi. I hope I pronounced her name correctly. Who will be talking about the Congo information system to verify legality. And please note that Mr. Ossebi will be speaking in French, so you'll need to select the translation if you need it in any other language. Just to tell you a little bit of who Mr. Ossebi is. He is a forest engineer. He's the coordinator of the Office of Forest Legality and Traceability in the Republic of Congo. Mr. Ossebi completed a degree in silviculture and forest management. He has worked as a public servant since 1991. Mr. Ossebi spent 8 years as head of the Brazzaville Department Office of Forest Economy and then 12 years as the head of the Forest Inventory and Cartography Office in the Directorate of Forests. Since 2013, Mr. Ossebi has been working at the Office of Forest Legality and Traceability, initially as the head of the Forest Legality Division and currently as the coordinator of the Office of Forest Legality and Traceability. As part of his work, Mr. Ossebi travels into the forest on field missions and has participated in seminars and workshops across Africa. Well, now, Mr. Ossebi, you're participating in workshops across the world now thanks to COVID and Zoom. So welcome on board, and please go right ahead with your presentation.
Merci, merci beaucoup pour cette petite présentation. Donc, je fais fi, n'est-ce pas, du premier slide. Alors, effectivement, nous avons donc 9 petits points à partager avec vous ensemble. Donc, on partira, n'est-ce pas, d'un bref aperçu du secteur forestier congolais et essayer un peu de recadrer notre présentation sur ce que vous attendez de nous, ce qu'on a eu à faire au Congo, justement en ce qui concerne la justification, en passant par l'approche et la portée. Et nous allons également parler un peu de la conception, du développement et le déploiement du système, et de la maintenance, du budget, de l'implication, n'est-ce pas, des parties prenantes, et puis essayer de voir quelques avantages et épingler un peu les améliorations du système, naturellement avec les leçons apprises et un petit message que nous allons donner à nos compatriotes du Ghana. Alors, donc, en ce qui concerne la bref aperçu, vous devez simplement retenir que la République du Congo est un pays qui est situé en Afrique, naturellement en Afrique centrale, et elle couvre, n'est-ce pas, une superficie de 342 000 km², et avec une population qui avoisine, n'est-ce pas, les 5 millions d'habitants. Alors, concernant, n'est-ce pas, la couverture forestière, la République du Congo a une superficie totale des forêts naturelles de près de 23 500 000 hectares. Alors, partant de cette couverture forestière qui est, n'est-ce pas, classée, on peut dire scindée en plusieurs parties, parmi lesquelles il y a 13 millions, près de 13 338 000 hectares, n'est-ce pas, de superficie totale des forêts attribuées. Et nous avons près de 5 888 000, une superficie totale des forêts aménagées. Et on a également quelques étendues, des superficies qui sont certifiées. Et là, il n'y a que sous le label du FSC, on en a donc près de 2 478 000 hectares. Et vu, n'est-ce pas, cette grande configuration de la forêt congolaise, et naturellement, la part, n'est-ce pas, de l'exploitation forestière dans le PIB de la République du Congo est d'environ 5,6%, soit donc la deuxième source nationale de revenus après, n'est-ce pas, le pétrole. Puisque la première ressource au Congo, c'est le pétrole, donc la ressource qui vient après, c'est la forêt, c'est le bois. Et dans ce système d'exploitation forestière, il y a plus de 11 000 emplois directs qui sont créés. Et au vu de cela, il y a au moins 5 000 emplois indirects qui sont également créés. Et le chiffre d'affaires de ce secteur aussi entre 100 et 400 milliards de francs CFA. Alors, sur la justification, et vous devez simplement retenir que le logiciel qu'on appelle chez nous système informatique de vérification de légalité a été développé pour répondre aux exigences de l'accord de partenariat volontaire, d'abord, qui a été signé entre la République du Congo et l'Union européenne. Et donc, ce logiciel vise donc, ça c'est notre conception, ça vise l'amélioration, le suivi de la traçabilité du bois et de la légalité forestière. Aussi, ça vise également l'abandon, n'est-ce pas, des pratiques de collecte des données manuelles au profit des moyens numériques. Ça, c'est l'innovation. Et ça vise également le fait de répondre, n'est-ce pas, en temps réel aux différents contrôles des administrations impliquées. Et il y a un point très important aussi, c'est l'amélioration de la transparence dans la gestion des données forestières. Alors, comme approche, nous avons épinglé 2 points. Il s'agit, n'est-ce pas, SIVL donc a été développé selon un modèle déjà conçu quelque part dans un pays autre, c'est-à-dire le Libéria. Et il faut retenir aussi que c'est un outil qui appartient au gouvernement de la République du Congo. Et donc, comme portée de ce système, le système est constitué, n'est-ce pas, l'architecture du SIVL. Il y a l'architecture du SIVL, il y a, n'est-ce pas, la conformité aux exigences de légalité, qui est le premier point. Après vient le contrôle de la chaîne d'approvisionnement, en passant par la vérification qui est associée. Il y a aussi la délivrance des licences FLECT, du certificat de légalité. Et aussi, on a mis un système d'interfaçage avec d'autres systèmes. Il y a aussi le système de traçabilité interne des entreprises forestières qui doit être connu et fait, et ils doivent être en relation avec le SIVL. Et plus loin, à ma droite, donc à votre droite également, vous voyez comment est-ce que est constitué ce système informatique de vérification à l'égalité. Donc, c'est un système qui a 17 modules. Parmi les 17 modules, on peut regrouper ces modules-là en 3. Donc, il y a un module qui concerne, n'est-ce pas, la légalité, le gros module qui concerne, n'est-ce pas, la traçabilité, parmi lesquels vous voyez, j'ai suivi la première présentation, ça part donc de l'inventaire jusqu'à l'exportation du bois, en passant par les différentes étapes de l'exploitation forestière. Voilà un peu comment est-ce qu'on a constitué schématiquement, n'est-ce pas, déjà, le système informatique de vérification à l'égalité du Congo. Alors, comme conception, développement et les mécanismes du déploiement de ce système, nous pouvons simplement dire que le ministère de l'économie forestière, à travers l'inspection générale, mais par le biais de la cellule de la légalité forestière et la traçabilité, donc la CLFT, et donc l'organe qui pilote, n'est-ce pas, ce processus de la conception jusqu'au déploiement de ce logiciel. C'est ça un peu la philosophie que nous avons eu à mettre en place quand on a eu à signer cet accord avec l'Union européenne. Et il y a aussi, n'est-ce pas, la conception. Par cette conception, on vise également la numérisation des processus actuels. Donc, on va dans un processus de pouvoir pas abandonner totalement, mais commencer déjà à réduire les versions papier en passant directement dans le système numérique. Donc, le SIVL a été donc dupliqué, comme j'avais dit tantôt, suivant le modèle libérien. Et que tout le matériel nécessaire pour le développement de ce logiciel a été utilisé. Et je veux dire, on a utilisé les serveurs, on a utilisé les postes de travail, beaucoup d'outils de saisie de données et plusieurs autres outils qui concourent, n'est-ce pas, au développement d'un logiciel digne de ce nom. Alors, comme infrastructure, le SIVL est développé et hébergé, comme j'avais dit, le SIVL, c'est un outil du gouvernement. Donc, au niveau du ministère de l'économie forestière, qui n'avait pas une infrastructure cohérente, n'est-ce pas, de pouvoir loger ce logiciel. Donc, nous l'avons logé au niveau, nous l'avons donc hébergé au niveau du data center du ministère des Finances et du Budget en République du Congo, qui effectivement aussi héberge plusieurs autres logiciels en République du Congo. Alors, donc, à travers donc, un manuel, comment est-ce que nous avons fait selon la conception, n'est-ce pas, de ce logiciel. Donc, on a eu à bâtir, n'est-ce pas, un manuel qu'on appelait le cas d'utilisation, donc des user stories, qui a été développé par le Congo en coordination naturellement avec EFI et plusieurs sociétés forestières. Naturellement, 4 sociétés forestières ont été mobilisées et 2 directions départementales, je disais, ont été mobilisées pour nous amener, n'est-ce pas, à faire les tests pendant la phase de développement. Et on a eu également à faire la formation des formateurs et qui est en continu parce que la formation ne se limite ou ne s'arrête pas. La formation, surtout en ce qui concerne un outil nouveau comme ça, est continuelle. Ça ne devrait même pas s'arrêter. Donc, à chaque fois, il faut continuer à former, toujours à apprendre. Alors, pour le déploiement de cet outil, le Congo a opté, n'est-ce pas, pour un déploiement modulaire. Donc, les différents modules que je vous ai montrés tout à l'heure, parmi les 17, on ne va pas déployer le logiciel en un coup sur tous les modules. Donc, nous avons scindé le logiciel, nous l'avons regroupé en quelques modules. Donc, le logiciel, en ce moment, est en train d'être déployé, mais modulairement. Pour la première partie, nous avons commencé par le module fiscalité. Et là, nous sommes en train d'emmener, n'est-ce pas, à faire des formations en ce qui concerne le module légalité et le permis spécial. Et ensuite viendra la partie traçabilité dans tout son ensemble. Donc voilà pourquoi pour le déploiement, nous avons opté sur un déploiement modulaire. Bon, la durée qu'on a eu à développer l'outil, ça nous a pris pratiquement 18 mois. De la conception jusqu'à ces phases de test-là que j'ai évoquées tout à l'heure. Donc, la durée du déploiement est estimée à environ 24 mois. Ça, c'est selon les estimations. Alors, voilà un peu comment est-ce que nous avons conçu notre stratégie avant d'aller à l'opérationnalisation de ce logiciel. Donc, on est parti d'abord d'un point en ce qui concerne l'hébergement. Qu'est-ce que nous allons faire pendant l'hébergement? Vous voyez ce qui a été fait. Après, donc, l'hébergement, il faut voir l'option de faire les améliorations. Après les améliorations, il faut voir comment est-ce que nous allons maintenir, n'est-ce pas, le logiciel en fonctionnalité, pour que ça soit toujours fonctionnel, pour ne pas qu'il y ait des arrêts ou bien comment on appelle ça, qu'il y ait des bugs à tout moment. Et après, donc, la maintenance, il faut naturellement aussi voir l'aspect sur comment équiper toutes les structures qui doivent utiliser cet outil. En partant de l'administration forestière, des autres administrations qui sont impliquées, et naturellement aussi des entreprises forestières, donc tous les utilisateurs. Tout cela fait, il faut donc penser à aller vers les formations. Donc, il faut former tous ceux qui doivent utiliser cet outil en leur donnant toutes les connaissances requises pour bien utiliser cet outil. Et donc, quand les formations vont finir, et en ce moment-là, nous pouvons naturellement voir quelles seraient, n'est-ce pas, les options qui pourraient nous emmener sur sa mise en opérationnalisation effective. Voilà comment nous avons bâti notre stratégie avant d'arriver au déploiement proprement dit. Bon, ça c'est la stratégie, mais il faut essayer aussi de voir comment est-ce que le système doit être maintenu et les coûts. Alors, donc, il a été prévu une application d'assistance et de suivi et d'évaluation qu'on appelait le e-learning. Donc, c'est un système qui nous amène, n'est-ce pas, à être en contact avec les utilisateurs en ligne, à pouvoir les former à tout moment. Il y a également un center call pour recevoir, n'est-ce pas, les plaintes et les doléances des utilisateurs. Et en plus de cela, il y a 2 administrateurs système qui sont associés aux techniciens du ministère des Finances et du Budget. Donc, ils sont mobilisés jour et nuit pour assurer, n'est-ce pas, la sécurité et la maintenance de cet outil. Après cela, plusieurs sources, il faut reconnaître qu'il y a plusieurs sources de financement qui ont été mobilisées. Il y a la République du Congo qui a, à partir du budget État, a mis des moyens. Il y a l'Union européenne également qui a mis beaucoup de moyens. Et la Banque mondiale aussi, à travers un projet qu'on appelle PRISP. Et pour le budget, donc, comme je disais, 2 sources de financement avaient été allouées pour développer l'outil, parmi lesquelles l'Union européenne qui avait investi la bagatelle somme de près d'1 million d'euros et la partie congolaise, par le budget État, a eu à mettre 800 millions de francs CFA. Donc, environ 1 milliard de francs CFA pour le déploiement du SIV. Et on a également évoqué le prélèvement d'une redevance auprès des entreprises forestières qui est prévu afin d'assumer, n'est-ce pas, le coût lié aux fournisseurs, à la maintenance et aux utilisateurs du système. Et parmi ce prélèvement-là, il faut reconnaître qu'il y a une partie de ce coût qui sera supportée par le budget de l'État. Et le coût de l'exploitation annuelle du système ne sera estimé qu'après la première année de l'opérationnalisation effective du système. À l'heure actuelle, nous ne pouvons pas estimer, n'est-ce pas, le véritable coût de l'exploitation en réel. Donc, il faut d'abord attendre la première année quand nous allons déployer. Et c'est en ce moment-là que nous pouvons donner un chiffre approximatif. Alors, pour l'implication des parties prenantes, donc pendant la phase du développement du système, il y a un groupe d'experts qui a été créé et ce groupe-là a été composé des experts métiers de l'administration forestière, donc tous les techniciens. On a pris un échantillon des techniciens forestiers qui connaissent la loi, qui connaissent la forêt, qui ont travaillé uniquement dans la forêt. Et on a associé également les représentants de la société civile. Et on ne s'est pas arrêté là. Dans ce groupe, il y a eu également des personnes ressources issues principalement des entreprises forestières qui venaient participer quand on examinait ces différents cas d'utilisation. Donc, toutes ces personnes avaient été mises en place pour, n'est-ce pas, tester et valider les cas d'utilisation du SIV. Alors, comme avantage, nous avons épinglé certains avantages, parmi lesquels que nous avons épinglés, on peut citer. Donc, il faut un renforcement de la gouvernance forestière qui sera assuré, naturellement. Aussi, le respect du référentiel FLECT entraînera sans condition le paiement total par les entreprises forestières des taxes prévues au titre d'une année, par exemple. Et comme avantage aussi, il y a toutes les transactions qui seraient occasionnées par l'inobservation des dispositions réglementaires en vigueur seront recouvrées avant la délivrance du prochain certificat de légalité, puisque le certificat de légalité se délivre chaque année. Donc, ça aura une validité d'une année. Et comme avantage aussi, il va y avoir naturellement la disparition des obligations de documentation papier, mais les transactions plus rapides, les coûts de transaction seront un peu réduits, et du point de vue de l'économie des ressources humaines, et aussi des meilleurs rapports seront produits, et plus d'informations seront accessibles au public, et tout cela, c'est la transparence qui sera comme un peu accrue. Alors, comme leçon apprise, comme venait de dire mon collègue du Ghana tout à l'heure, effectivement, on a eu à vivre, n'est-ce pas, des cas de résistance au changement de la part d'une minorité des entreprises forestières qui ne voulaient pas totalement coopérer quand nous avons lancé, n'est-ce pas, les formations. Mais ils seront dans l'obligation, ces entreprises-là, d'emboîter le pas parce que c'est une obligation nationale. C'est tout le monde qui doit utiliser le logiciel. Donc, on ne voit pas comment est-ce qu'ils pourraient résister jusqu'à la fin. Ils finiront par elles-mêmes de venir s'associer, d'intégrer, n'est-ce pas, le système et puis d'utiliser cet outil. Comme autre leçon aussi, il y a les soucis liés au développement et à l'opérationnalisation qui sont souvent sous-estimés. Mais le plus grand à retenir ici, c'est un récurrent problème de connectivité qui cause souvent le retard dans la prise en main du système par les utilisateurs. Alors, comme message, nous avons épinglé 5. Il y en a beaucoup, hein, mais les 5 que nous avons considérés comme un peu essentiels, c'est d'abord un, il faut associer toutes les parties prenantes depuis la phase de développement du système jusqu'à son opérationnalisation. Très important. Il faut aussi bien évaluer le coût de mise en œuvre de ce système. Troisième message aussi, il faut mettre en place un groupe d'experts, des vrais sachants, des vrais connaisseurs. Et donc, ce groupe-là doit être composé de toutes les parties prenantes pour valider l'ensemble des modules du système que vous devez mettre en place. Et il faut naturellement bien s'assurer de l'endroit où vous devez héberger votre système. S'assurer également d'une bonne couverture Internet sur toute la Guyane. Je ne sais pas si vous allez opter sur la fibre optique ou bien sur les satellites. Vraiment, il faut bien s'assurer de tous ces points-là pour que vous ne tombiez pas dans les coups où le Congo a eu souvent a eu du mal à pouvoir, n'est-ce pas, déployer tout son système parce que depuis que nous avons commencé ce processus, c'est quand même, on est quand même buté à quelque chose. Sinon, on devait déjà opérationnaliser, n'est-ce pas, ce système. Donc, voilà un peu ces quelques conseils, messages que nous avons tenu à vous partager. Et dit cela, je vous remercie très énormément.
Thank you, Alain. Fantastic. I apologize. I think Guyana is becoming so fully integrated internationally. We're not only being mistaken for Ghana, but also French Guyana. So that was a translation issue on the slide. So please, the original presentation from Alain did mention Guyana. I'm glad that we can clear that up. I've also noticed one interesting point that Alain mentioned, and I don't know if our Guyanese counterparts has taken note of it. He has a forest industry that generates between 50 to 200 million US per annum, if I have my conversion correct, with a workforce, direct employment of 10 to 15,000 people. That's a big accomplishment, I would say, in terms of level of productivity and output. So I made note of that. And Alain, I love your logo. I don't know if anyone paid any attention to your logo. Very, very nice. Your FLEC logo at the bottom of your slides. Just something to share with the others. Kenny, we need to have a wonderful logo just as Congo. So I'm challenging you. All right, I don't want to delay much more. I would like to introduce our final presenter, Jose Humberto Chaves, who is from Brazil. And he will be doing a presentation which talks about the chain of custody system. And many of you may know Brazil is not in a VPA system, but they have done a lot. I believe it's going to really tickle your interest as to what are some of the possibilities out there as it relates to technology. I was impressed when I saw Jose's presentation, and I think you will. So Jose Humberto Chaves has a master's in forestry sciences from the Federal University of the Costa, Brazil. He has extensive experience in public management of forest resources, first working as Director of Biodiversity and Forests at the Federal Environmental Agency, Barama, if I have that right, and then working at the Brazilian Forest Service, where he held the position of Executive Manager of Forest Planning and currently as Executive Manager of Forest Monitoring and Audit. So Jose, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Obrigado, Mohindra. Desculpem a todos falar em português. Meu inglês não é bom o suficiente, não é fluente o suficiente para fazer a todos entender e eu conseguir passar com mais detalhes a mensagem. Mas eu vou tentar falar devagar para permitir uma melhor tradução e estou aberto também depois para eventuais dúvidas que ficarem. Eu vou falar de um sistema de cadeia de custódia, que é o sistema de rastreabilidade utilizado aqui pelo Serviço Florestal Brasileiro para monitorar as concessões florestais em florestas públicas. Aqui no Brasil, nós temos basicamente duas possibilidades de acesso aos recursos florestais. Uma em áreas privadas, onde diretamente os proprietários buscam o licenciamento da sua atividade junto aos governos locais. E nós temos as florestas públicas, que elas dependem de um processo de licenciamento um pouco mais rígido, e é esse processo de controle um pouco mais rígido que eu vou mostrar para vocês. O sistema de cadeia de custódia, ele foi desenvolvido e acoplado a ele de forma paralela, nós desenvolvemos um conjunto de ferramentas de monitoramento. E é isso que eu vou enfatizar aqui durante a minha apresentação, não só mostrar o sistema de rastreabilidade, mas também mostrar como que essas ferramentas auxiliares trabalham em conjunto com esse sistema. Então, o Serviço Florestal Brasileiro, ele é responsável por monitorar as áreas de florestas públicas contratadas, né? Então, nós temos contratos com empresas privadas para realizar o manejo florestal nessas áreas públicas e para monitorar a quantidade de madeira e de produtos florestais que saem, a gente desenvolveu um sistema de cadeia de custódia, que é o sistema de rastreabilidade. Esse sistema, ele vem sendo utilizado e para validar as informações desse sistema, nós desenvolvemos algumas ferramentas, como o uso de drones para ajudar a medir madeira estocada nos pátios de floresta. Usamos uma ferramenta a laser, né, que é o LiDAR. LiDAR é uma ferramenta onde o sensor a laser embarcado num avião é utilizado para escanear a floresta. Obviamente que a gente usa isso de forma amostral. E usamos imagens de satélite processadas para identificar a exploração seletiva de madeira. Tudo isso para suportar ou para ajudar a validar as informações do sistema de cadeia de custódia e permitir o direcionamento das ações de campo, né, de vistoria em campo ou de auditorias de campo. Esse sistema ele foi desenvolvido pelo Serviço Florestal e disponibilizado para os concessionários de forma gratuita. Então, o concessionário florestal ele não precisa pagar pela utilização desse serviço, mas ele é obrigado a utilizar. É uma obrigação que a gente estabelece em contrato. Todas as principais etapas de execução do plano de manejo florestal são registradas nesse sistema. Então, o corte das árvores, Antes disso, até mesmo o inventário, o corte, o seccionamento das árvores em toras, o transporte, tudo isso é registrado no sistema, e a gente incluiu algumas checagens, alguns pontos de controle ao longo da validação desse sistema. Então, nós temos o mapeamento das áreas de unidades de manejo florestal e das áreas de produção anual. Então, para cada unidade de produção anual, nós temos obrigatoriamente um inventário com a identificação das espécies e a localização de cada árvore. Essas árvores, elas são identificadas, obviamente, com um código específico, e a partir desse código, ele é carregado ao longo de toda a cadeia de comercialização da árvore. Então, quando é feito o registro das toras, esse registro ele é alimentado no sistema. Então, a gente tem a identificação de cada uma das toras e o vínculo dessa tora com a árvore que a originou. E no transporte, da mesma maneira, para cada transporte nós sabemos exatamente quais toras de cada uma das árvores que está sendo transportado naquele momento. Esse módulo de controle da floresta, ele tem funcionado já há bastante tempo, e recentemente nós construímos um novo módulo no sistema que controla o processo de conversão da madeira em madeira serrada nas serrarias. Então, todo o controle de madeira serrada também já é feito no nosso sistema de cadeia de custódia. Então, nós temos condições de visualizar todas as árvores do inventário. Aqui é um exemplo de uma plotagem de todas as árvores do inventário florestal. E em vermelho são as árvores que foram efetivamente cortadas, foram colhidas. Então, nós podemos checar em campo e chegar no toco de cada árvore colhida e validar se a informação prestada pelo concessionário está coerente com a informação no sistema de cadeia de custódia. Eu disse que nós usamos uma ferramenta de laser, né, que é em inglês LiDAR, para monitorar o que é feito dentro das áreas concedidas. Essa ferramenta, talvez ela seja a ferramenta mais cara que nós temos hoje nas áreas de concessão. Por ela ser um pouco mais cara, nós fazemos levantamentos amostrais. Nós lançamos parcelas anuais para identificar, fazer um mapeamento antes e depois da exploração. E por diferença, nós conseguimos, então, identificar todas as clareiras das árvores cortadas. E nós cruzamos essas informações do LiDAR com as informações do sistema de cadeia de custódia, uma vez que nós temos a espacialização geográfica, a localização geográfica das árvores que foram efetivamente colhidas. Quando a gente identifica alguma diferença entre a informação do LiDAR, ou alguma inconsistência da informação do LiDAR e da informação do sistema de cadeia de custódia, nós direcionamos as nossas auditorias de campo para a região onde existe essa diferença. Aqui é um outro exemplo da aplicação do LiDAR para avaliar o impacto da exploração do manejo florestal. Observe que eu tenho aqui uma imagem à esquerda, que é uma imagem já processada, trabalhada do LiDAR, em que eu consigo realçar, antes da exploração florestal, eu tenho apenas as estradas construídas. Eu tenho uma outra imagem, depois da exploração do manejo florestal, em que eu consigo identificar também alguns pátios e algumas clareiras, mostrando o que aqui houve uma exploração florestal. A gente consegue com o passar do tempo, identificar a capacidade que a floresta tem de se recuperar aquela intervenção. Então, aqui eu tenho, por exemplo, uma sequência de imagens de LiDAR de 2011, 2013 e 2015. Observe que em algumas áreas, eu vou identificar aqui uma clareira. Observe que a imagem de 2011 é antes da exploração florestal. A imagem de 2013 é após a exploração florestal. Então, e em 2015 já é uma área sob recuperação. Então, observe que aqui, nessa porção, eu tive uma clareira, uma região onde houve exploração. Depois eu tenho aqui em 2013 e 2015 árvores surgindo, mostrando recuperação da floresta. Uma outra ferramenta que nós utilizamos para validar a informação do nosso sistema de cadeia de custódia, nós chamamos de DETEX, que é detecção de exploração seletiva. É um tratamento de imagens de satélite, imagens ótica, Landsat ou Sentinel, para realçar, nós fazemos um tratamento nessas imagens para realçar a exploração seletiva. Então, observem que aqui eu tenho um tratamento feito em novembro do ano de 2015 e aqui em agosto de 2016. Observem que nós conseguimos ver, por exemplo, aqui, sinais, cicatrizes na floresta decorrentes da atividade de manejo florestal. Aqui também. Então, essas áreas, elas sofreram exploração entre um período e outro. Então, nós utilizamos essas imagens também tratadas para verificar as áreas que efetivamente foram manejadas sem necessariamente ter que ir a campo. Outra técnica que nós desenvolvemos e estamos utilizando é o uso de microdrones, de drones, pequenos drones, para sobrevoar os pátios onde existe madeira estocada. No sistema de cadeia de custódia, nós sabemos quanto volume de madeira, qual é o volume de madeira em cada um dos pátios, porque o concessionário é obrigado a registrar isso. Quando a gente vai a campo, a gente sobrevoa esse pátio com o drone, fazemos um tratamento para criar um mosaico em 3 dimensões e usamos um software para calcular o volume das pilhas de madeira. Com isso, a gente consegue validar se a informação de volume de madeira colhida confere com a informação registrada. Como eu disse, o sistema ele permite monitorar também o processo de conversão de madeira, e esse processo de conversão, durante esse processo de conversão, a gente consegue vincular cada pacote de madeira processada às árvores que deram origem a essa madeira. A gente fez isso por pacote, vinculação de pacotes com um conjunto de toras que geraram esse pacote. Com isso, a gente consegue, por meio de um aplicativo que funciona em dispositivos móveis, fazer consultas e gerar mapas com a localização geográfica das árvores que geraram aquele determinado pacote de madeira serrada. Nós desenvolvemos também um aplicativo para facilitar a coleta de dados em campo. O concessionário, então, utiliza esse aplicativo e nós utilizamos o aplicativo para validar em campo essas informações. O sistema ele é disponível, então, via internet para o concessionário. Então, o custo que o concessionário tem é de instalar sinais de internet no campo para manter esse sistema devidamente atualizado. Aqui eu coloquei uma estimativa de custo que a gente teve para desenvolver esse sistema. Isso não é muito exato, porque esse sistema, parte da infraestrutura utilizada para esse sistema foi também utilizada para outros sistemas nossos. Então, com isso, a gente acaba tendo uma redução, uma diluição nos custos de investimento. Aqui são algumas telas do sistema. Uma guia de transporte, por exemplo, gera um QR Code, um código QR, e esse código QR é utilizado, então, para validar a rastreabilidade da madeira. Então, esse sistema ele é usado nos nossos procedimentos de auditoria, e o concessionário utiliza esse sistema para melhor gerenciar a produção de madeira e também para conferir transparência para as empresas que adquirem madeira dos nossos concessionários. Resumidamente, porque o meu tempo já está acabando, a lição aprendida que a gente tem, a principal lição, é que a gente tem que usar as tecnologias existentes, por exemplo, LiDAR, drones, imagens de satélite, para poder ajudar a gente a validar as informações do sistema de rastreabilidade que nós desenvolvemos. A gente, então, precisa usar todo esse aparato tecnológico a nosso favor para validar as informações, independentemente de que sistema cada país utilizar. Obrigado. Estou à disposição depois para mais perguntas ao longo do debate.
Great, great. Jose, that was fantastic. I think your level of advancement puts you way ahead of the game. Even though you're not a VPA country, you've certainly done a lot introducing technology. Very, very impressive. I'm hoping that all the other countries can catch up with that kind of technology. And I'm glad that you were able to field test not just the findings from the satellite and so on, but you can actually go on the ground and verify those information. It's really fantastic. All right, we have had quite a lot of questions and interest coming in. And I know we are very much against time right now. And I'm apologizing again. Some of your questions may not be able to be raised here, but all the presenters are receiving those questions that are relevant to them. And I'm trusting they will take it on board and find a way to incorporate it into the final analysis and report. So let me get right into the questions. I don't want to put too much of my inputs into this now because I think I want to give all the stakeholders attending a chance. So one of the very first questions coming through, and this is addressed to Kenny, it speaks about, they use the description here that there are times when there could be a loss of market or shipment if there are minor errors in the system. And the system might be causing some level of frustration. I'm thinking of maybe the bureaucracy when errors arise and shipments are not allowed, and then you lose that ship for a particular date. So they're talking here about how do we deal with the frustrations that can be created by the system. Kenny?
Thanks, Neil. I think, clearly, our experiences have shown that, these things do come up. I think why the system is better is that I don't think we can sort of stop those minor things from coming up. I think what these systems allow us to do now, or will allow us to do, is I think be able to address, first of all, identify and address them in a much more efficient manner. Because I think sometimes, and you will be familiar with some of this as well. Not that when something comes up, you may know, you have an idea, but there's so much have to be checked to verify. I think the thing also, we have to understand the magnitude, the nature, first of all, of what is considered minor. I mean, we have our definition may differ on what is minor, but I think the system will now allow us to maybe have a lot more access at your fingertips to identify where the problem is. What exactly happened? Was it just as simple as 6 and a 9, where a 6 was written for 9, or vice versa? And I think, so for me, it's not, I think these systems actually allow us to better respond and to these minor infractions when they happen. And I think the other thing is, again, we're talking about legality. And so I think, for all, we have to understand that they have to be addressed. But certainly I think this will make it a lot better.
Thanks, Kenny. Question here for Chris. The question is, in the industry portal, do companies make self-declaration for their production data directly in the system, and then the Forest Commission checks and approve?
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, so this portal has been tested and is to be launched, I think, in a couple of weeks' time, next week. So that's how it's designed. It's the latest addition to the portals we have. But that's exactly how it is going to be run. It will be that we receive inputs from industry, and it's going to be cross-checked by the FC.
Okay, thank you. And Chris, another question for you, but I think I would like to include Alain in the response. It stays here, has any consideration about deploying the system in the cloud instead of on-premise being considered? So they're talking about using the cloud technology. So maybe, Alain, you want to go first, and then Chris? Yes.
OK, merci. En fait, nous, le système, tel qu'on l'a conçu, le système développé, on doit, n'est-ce pas, pouvoir le déployer. On va utiliser, n'est-ce pas, la fibre optique. Ça, c'est l'option retenue par le gouvernement, la fibre optique. Mais on ne va pas s'arrêter seulement à la fibre optique, parce que la fibre optique, des fois, on a déjà constaté, hein, des fois, quand les bateaux passent, des fois, il peut y avoir un endommagement et tout. Mais on a aussi les VSAT qu'on a installés partout. Et les VSAT, c'est des systèmes qui pourront, n'est-ce pas, nous lier avec les satellites, et puis pour que la connexion soit toujours en permanence. Voilà un peu les deux options. Les options qu'on a eu à retenir, et tout ce matériel est stocké, logé au niveau du ministère des Finances.
Okay, thank you. Chris, you want to comment?
Yes, so we did consider the option of hosting the entire system in the cloud. For some reason, the physical hosting, I mean, having a data center, 2 data centers in the country, won the day, where so the servers are retained here in our offices at the head office, and the data recovery center is almost 200 miles away from here for obvious reasons. And the reason why we settled on this option away from the cloud hosting was, at that time, concerns with physical access to the server should something happen. But I suppose with the improvement in technology, probably that is becoming less and less of a concern. But at that time, that was our concern, and that's what informed our design to have the system physically located in our offices across the country.
Okay, thank you. Jose, I'd like to bring you in here. The question here is that it appears your system focuses on wood tracking. To what extent does it cover legality?
Nós temos alguns processos de validação, né, como eu mostrei, e a gente tem um processo de identificação das espécies, uma obrigação em que os concessionários são obrigados a encaminhar para alguns herbários pelo menos uma ecicata de cada espécie para identificação em um herbário registrado. Tá? Então, acho que essa é uma pergunta que eu vi aqui no chat sobre essa questão da legalidade das espécies. E teve uma outra também que eu esqueci de falar: qual o software que usamos para processar os dados do drone e gerar os volumes? A gente utiliza o software Pix4D. É um software caro, mas a licença é infinita, é perpétua e acaba justificando o investimento. nesse software.
And Chris, since I have you on the line, can you talk a bit about the cost of the technology, the LiDAR technology, along with the drones and the maintenance cost of it?
O custo do LiDAR, ele ainda é caro para a gente conseguir fazer numa escala muito grande. Para ter uma ideia, aqui no Brasil, esse custo vem caindo ao longo dos anos, e um custo que era de praticamente 20, 25 dólares por quilômetro quadrado, esse custo caiu, esse custo que era quase 100 dólares por quilômetro quadrado, caiu para próximo de 20, 25. Ainda é caro, mas existem cada vez mais empresas oferecendo esse serviço e a gente acredita que esse custo vai ser ainda mais reduzido no futuro. Tem uma outra tecnologia sendo desenvolvida que é o uso do LiDAR embarcado em drones. Ainda é caro também, mas eu imagino que daqui a alguns anos a gente vai ter sensores menores, né, embarcados em equipamentos menores também, o que faz com que os custos sejam reduzidos.
And since we're on the subject of cost and money, for Alain and for Chris, how do you see the cost being sustained over time by government, and what level of inputs would you expect from the industry? So maybe Alain, you can go first.
Oui, en ce qui concerne les coûts, effectivement, quand on a eu à développer un manuel, disons, du déploiement du SIVEL dans son entièreté, pour les coûts, la première année, les coûts risqueraient d'être, comme qui dirait, très exorbitants, seront énormes, vraiment à la hausse. Parce que, pourquoi je dis à la hausse? Parce qu'il faut partir d'abord par l'acquisition du matériel, mettre en place tout le système, c'est-à-dire équiper qu'il s'agisse au niveau des administrations impliquées, certainement aussi au niveau des entreprises forestières, parce que l'État a l'obligation aussi d'aider les entreprises forestières à être, n'est-ce pas, au point avant de lancer tout le processus. Donc, vous voyez, au départ, la première année, disons, les coûts risqueront d'être énormes. Mais la deuxième année, comme on a déjà mis en place pratiquement tous les prérequis, et la deuxième année, troisième année, ainsi de suite, je crois que l'investissement ne sera pas le même. Voilà un peu comment je peux directement répondre à cette préoccupation.
Thank you, Alain. Chris?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a very important issue to reflect on. For us, still being implementation, and anyone who wants to jump on the system or the wagon, if you like, important because it is all based on sustainability. I mean, what's really of essence is not really the investment costs, which for most of these partner countries, they're receiving assistance from their partner countries or member states or the EU. And so that could be, I'm struggling to use the word misleading. But when it comes to the operational phase and you're looking at the maintenance cost where you are more or less, you get on your own as a country, that's where it becomes tricky. So I saw in one of the questions, if I may just add a bit of it to it, was how have we so far paid for the maintenance cost? So it's, as I said, we've been running for about 2 years now, and because we transited from implementation phase to another phase of modification, that phase was kind of still like development. So we continue to receive assistance, but going forward, it's going to be on us as a country or as a sector. And we are looking at, maybe the value is not so much of essence, but we are looking at a cost that must be weighed against the kind of revenue that is generated in the sector, and all other factors considered, whether it is something that can be sustained. So we want to make sure that at the end of the day, all your timber, or maybe a good percentage of your timber revenue, is not going to service tracking systems. And that's the question we are answering now, and is advice I want to give to, I would like to give to any follow-up country that look at the revenues generated, look at how it is distributed, and see whether you could really afford to chip so much off into maintenance of tracking system. Because if tracking system cost is not a factored in cost in the distribution of forest revenues, then it's going to be a big issue. So that's how I'll answer it. I mean, you really weigh it against what is already existing as inflows in the sector. Yeah.
Great, Chris. Kenny, following from the lessons learned from Ghana and Congo, I think two questions here could be directed to you. One is speaking about what strategies do you have to reduce industry apathy and get their buy-in. This was directed to Alain, but I'm taking the opportunity for Kenny to comment on it. And also a question of how, to what extent our community is going to be involved in the implementation and monitoring of the system. Just to hear a little bit what Guyana is thinking after learning from the lessons from Congo and Ghana. Kenny?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I think clearly from the lessons, from what we're hearing, stakeholders will have to be involved at every step of the way. I think we have, obviously with COVID and so on, a lot of what we would have started has already been compromised a little bit. But certainly the idea, and I think even when we're working with the other TLAS agencies, it's really, and of course, all those agencies are also interacting, will also be interacting with the same stakeholders. But certainly to keep them in the discussion, I think, given what we saw in the negotiation in terms of being able to come up with an agreement that I think was reflective of what the stakeholders felt, certainly that same approach will be used in the joint implementation framework as well. We've actually, how it has been designed is clearly to ensure that there is a lot of capacity building and so on that goes into all stakeholders. But that is why at the start as well, I said, I think that we also have to be very careful, and that's why the lessons is good to hear. Be very careful of, I think the point Chris made just now, how complex do we want the system, and bearing in mind what it will cost and how difficult will it be for stakeholders to connect with that system and make it work. And if you're spending too much in that, but I think, thus far what we have seen, and even for communities, it is to have a very direct involvement. We do have a pretty good idea already of what some of the challenges are. I mean, connectivity is a big one, and we recognize it very early. But certainly, every step of the way, it is to develop the system with the stakeholders in mind. I think somebody mentioned that as well. It's to keep stakeholders. I think it was Chris in his last slide that he didn't actually touch on. Is to keep stakeholders involved every step of the way, so that we land on a system and on a system that works for everybody that is going to be connected to it.
Great, and I think it's more of a statement, but Kenny, you could still share some thoughts on this. This is coming from one of our focus groups, which is a community-based. It's saying we would be happy for these systems to be implemented in Guyana so we can overcome some hurdles. And secondly, would any consideration be given to assist communities to get on board with such systems?
I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, maybe in the interest of time, if we just go with the short answer. But as I said, for us, looking at the system, and we've said this even to get us to this point, is we develop the system, and the system will be developed with, let's say, I don't want to say the poorest. I'm looking for the right way of putting this, but develop a system with the stakeholder that is going to be most challenged, let me put it that way, to be able to work with the system and within that system. So it's not to design a system that we would automatically start shutting people out, but it is the most challenged stakeholder to have enough help and support given to them to be able to work within the confines of that system.
Great, Kenny. Guys, in the interest of time, I think I will have to bring this session to a close. But just to wrap up quickly from all the presenters, and I really would like to thank them, very excellent presentations. I think each presentation actually deserves 2 hours each of engagement. A lot of questions still unanswered, but I know that the presenters have taken note of them. They're receiving them via the chats. So what we've learned is that, one, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. As much as we can avoid that, we can learn from each other. It's a very time sensitive issue too of developing this system, but it costs a lot of time to prepare and put into action, and it's not a one size fits all, and it's not over in one go. It calls for training and retraining. I've heard that. And of course, the big issue is money. I'm shocked to see some of the costs that were presented. I think it's good that we bring the costs up so late into the VPA process, because it could be a deterrent. But there are many stakeholders, NGOs and funding agencies that I know will come on board, as we have seen in other countries. So we need to address that issue of cost. And I like the idea that we pointed out not only the capital costs, but also the maintenance costs. That is something which could be overlooked over time. And you can start off very good, and in 3-4 years, you find it to be burdensome. And we need to be creative in our financing for that. For sure, it's very, very complex. And I said this from the beginning. It's where the tire hits the road. You know, we talk about the mechanics of it all, and this is where mechanics and intelligence have to interface. It is the due diligence of the entire process that is being measured and tested here. It's a litmus test. And this is where not just the national system is being observed and managed, but internationally, in the receiving countries for shipments will also engage in this process. So it could be very complex and challenging. And the issue of stakeholdership involvement, very, very key. I think it has been brought up very clear from Ghana and Congo. This is where you need to start from, involving all stakeholders, forming special committees, and having a clear appreciation for the different background. Kenny just mentioned that, you know, don't create super complex systems that, you know, it's smarter than us and we cannot maintain it and manage it. One of the suggestions I would want to make here is that think of it as the new era of smartphones. I think many persons in the past would have said, you know, you can't ask a chainsaw operator to go with a GPS and locate a stump. But now today, that operator is so familiar with a smart instrument called a smartphone. I think it makes things easier, but we should align ourselves with the smart technology that is out there. Any system has to provide traceability, has to have storage, has to have backup, has to have protection. And at the end of the day, it has to be useful for analysis purposes, not only for traceability. What do we do with it at the end of the day over a period of time? It can be a very informative system for improvements in forest management. The IT infrastructure, wow, that could be a daunting process, especially for countries that are lacking in infrastructure. Accessibility can be an issue. In Guyana, we are faced with that challenge, you know, a lot of remote areas. Earlier in the week, you would have heard we've had community participation with limited technology, bandwidth and such like. And I think that's where the money comes in a lot as to the quality and cost of investment. And power is a big issue. And I think it was recommended here that we go solar because, you know, the power infrastructure is going to make it come on or not come on at all. And that can then cause some of the hurdles that one observer made about shipments being delayed and so on. And stress the point here of training and retraining. You know, there must be succession planning in this process. You know, in Guyana, we might be a bit fortunate. some extent that most of our chain of custody is channeled through the city. So we can set up strategic hubs to manage these things, but nevertheless, it cannot be taken for granted. You know, all countries, or most countries, especially countries such as Guyana, we have border issues. You know, there can be infiltration from timber moving across borders, and that is something that got to be taken on board. And I know a lot of the presenters talk about the traceability from the forests, but I think future discussion needs to touch on traceability within manufacturing. That can be also a challenge. The chain of custody systems, you know, when we're talking about lumber, plywood, furniture components, and such like. And I want to give the assurance to stakeholders. I've been in the forest industry for 20 years in Guyana, and a lot of experience here in the forum from the presenters. And I want to say something to you which should give you some level of reassurance. Unlike any other natural resources that I can think of, timber probably possesses the easiest means of verification because it's very large, it is above ground, it's not easy to put in your pocket like other natural resources. It has traceability. You can go back to stump. You know, when I think about minerals, for example, I think about oil. How do you tag oil? How do you tag the gold that we extract? Timber offers us that opportunity. So it could be daunting, but at the same time, timber possesses certain traits that makes it more manageable. And, you know, we talk about the extractive industry transparency. Timber lends itself easily to this process. Guyana has been tagging timber since the year 2000. I was part of that process along with Mr. Singh, who will come on shortly. And as I said, it makes it easier to set up systems around that product. But at the same time, it cannot be taken for granted. So I think I've said a lot. I've gone over 5 minutes of the time, the extended time. So I would now like to bring in Mr. James Singh, who is no stranger to this forum. You know, he was the one that opened the forum, and I think it's only fitting that he closes the program, trusting that he was happy with the proceedings over time. And I will not take the time to introduce Mr. James Singh. I think most people are familiar with him. He's been at the Forestry Commission for 20 plus years. I think it's 21 to be exact. And he has led the charge in developing all of these systems and has made Guyana, along with his team, a very recognized forest management country overall. So I think I don't want to go into too much introduction of Mr. Singh. I hope he appreciates that in the interest of time, I'm trying to get him to take part in this session and give you guys a chance to get a wrap up from him. So Mr. James Singh, I'd like to bring you on board and thank all the organizers behind the scenes. I'm amazed about what we've accomplished. I was brought in very late into this, and I feel very comfortable knowing the kind of support I got from the team behind the scenes, the translators and so on. Thank you, guys. So Mr. Singh, over to you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Neil, and good afternoon to all of you. I would really like to express sincere appreciation for your time and valuable contributions, which made this event a resounding success. Special thanks to the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources and the two excellencies who also participated in the opening panel. Special thanks also to participants from the Guyanese forestry sector, the government agencies in Guyana, from civil society organizations in Guyana, from government agencies in other countries, such as Ghana, Congo, Liberia, Honduras, and others, and participants from other countries interested in learning more about the forest sector in Guyana and these other countries. GFC is very, very pleased with the outcome of this learning event. The panel on markets provided an opportunity for useful discussions on the current state of the Guyana forestry sector, current export markets, and main product lines. The private sector panel provided helpful insights into the challenges for Guyanese timber in export markets, including questions of quality, standardization, transport costs, and demand for different species and different types of products in appreciable quantities. The panel on communities allowed for us to see what is possible within communities who dwell in or around the forest. And to date, I think we have 69 community forestry organizations with a direct membership of over 4,000 people. It highlighted that with relevant support and capacity building, these communities can be very productive and contribute more to national development. The panel focusing on information management systems today helped draw out the lessons learned from Ghana, Congo, and Brazil on the development and implementation of both tracking systems and information management systems, which can provide valuable insights for the Guyana VPA implementation process. This panel provided very useful insights, especially helpful to Guyana, since this is one area that we are currently focusing on. Finally, the event benefited from the active participation of a wide range of stakeholders. Again, we consider this event to have been a thorough success and hope that the participants take away new insights and perspectives on the topics covered. The event was co-organized and co-supported by the World Resources Institute, the European Forest Institute Technical Assistance Project, the government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, acting through the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations European Union FLEG program. We thank you all for your support, and we look forward to having future events like this, not only in Guyana, but in other countries. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Amy, who will tell us what the next steps are and the follow-up activities. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. And thank you to all the participants, speakers, interpreters, and organizers behind the scenes who've been working hard to make this event happen. Before we end and part ways, I wanted to let you know that the presentations from this 4-day event will be available via the event website, which is the exact address is being put into the chat right now so that you can open it up and hang on to it. And we will end our Facebook transmission now. So thanks to all those people who joined us via Facebook or watch later on.